Hugo never needed big words to be known in the town. At 40 years old, his days were marked by the smell of oil, the sound of engines, and the brief conversations with customers that filled his workshop. His calloused hands told the story of a job that started early, and the weariness in his eyes made it clear that he carried more than just tools. He carried stories. He was not just a mechanic, he was someone people trusted, even without knowing why. That night, the rain battered the town with unusual intensity. The noise of the drops on the workshop's zinc roof created a melancholic symphony as Hugo finished organizing his tools. The clock read almost 10 o'clock, and he would still stay a few more hours working when suddenly the lights flickered and then went out completely. Great, he muttered to himself, groping for the flashlight he kept in the drawer. The sudden darkness left him a little disoriented, but years of experience guided him safely through the familiar space. When he finally found the flashlight and turned it on, he decided it was time to go home. The storm showed no signs of letting up anytime soon. Walking towards the door, Hugo felt a shiver run down his spine. Something was not right. As he opened the workshop door, the flashlight beam revealed a figure huddled on the ground near the entrance. It was a woman, completely soaked, with her arms hugging her knees. Her face was partially hidden by the hood of a wet coat. Hugo's heart raced. For a moment, he thought of simply closing the door and walking away. After all, it was late, and he didn't know this person. But something about that scene touched him deeply. The vulnerability of that solitary figure on the rainy night awakened his compassion. "Hey, are you okay?" Hugo asked, his gentle voice barely audible over the noise of the rain. The woman slightly raised her head but did not respond. Hugo noticed she was trembling, probably from cold and fear. What harm would it do to let her in, he thought, since there was nothing of value here, and she could at least spend the night. "Look, it's a terrible night out there. Why don't you come in? I have a blanket and a dry place where you can stay," he offered, extending his hand in an inviting gesture. The woman hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her options in light of the offer. Finally, she stood up slowly and entered the workshop with cautious steps, her head bowed. The drops of water dripping from her soaked clothes formed small trails on the concrete floor. Hugo, without saying a word, quickly closed the door behind her, blocking the cold wind that insisted on invading the space. "What is your name?" he tried again, while looking for the blanket he kept for emergencies. The woman remained silent, only accepting the blanket with a slight nod. Hugo respected her desire not to speak, understanding that she was probably going through a difficult situation. "It's okay. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. Stay here. You are safe. I'll come back in the morning with some dry clothes and something to eat, okay?" said Hugo, trying to convey reassurance in his voice. The woman nodded again, this time murmuring an almost inaudible, "Thank you." Hugo left the workshop with a heavy heart, casting one last look at the figure huddled in the corner. Throughout the night, he could hardly sleep, thinking about the stranger and whether she might have had a wrong intention, but it didn't matter. He did what he thought was right. The next morning, he woke up early, eager to return to the workshop. He gathered some clean clothes that belonged to his sister and prepared a simple breakfast. The sun had barely risen when he arrived at the workshop, carrying a bag with the clothes and a container with coffee and sandwiches. As he opened the door, the daylight revealed the workshop exactly as he had left it the night before. The woman was still there, wrapped in the blanket, sleeping on one of the workbenches. She seemed to have been exhausted the previous night, so she wasn't moving much. Hugo approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. "Good morning," he said softly. "I brought some things for you." The woman moved slowly, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. When she finally lifted her face, Hugo felt as if the ground had disappeared from beneath his feet. The shock hit him like lightning. "Aurora," he whispered, incredulous. Aurora's eyes, once vibrant and full of life, now seemed dull and frightened. Her face, which he remembered always smiling, was pale and marked by deep, dark circles. She seemed so different from the Aurora he knew. The wife of his best friend Oliver. "Hugo, I'm so sorry." Aurora finally spoke, her voice choked. "I didn't know where to go." Hugo sat down beside her, trying to process the situation. Aurora and Oliver had moved to the neighbouring city a few years ago after getting married. He maintained sporadic contact with his friend, mainly through social media, where they always seemed happy and fulfilled. "What happened, Aurora? Why are you here alone in this state?" Hugo asked, genuinely concerned. She hesitated, tears beginning to form in her eyes. She clutched the blanket more tightly around herself as if seeking protection. I ran away," she finally admitted, her voice almost a whisper. "Oliver, he isn't who we thought he was." Hugo felt a tight knot in his stomach, a bitter sensation mixing disbelief and confusion. Oliver wasn't just his friend. He was almost like a brother. They had grown up together, shared secrets, dreams, and even the greatest defeats in life. Aurora was also part of that past, a childhood friend who somehow sealed the bond between them even more. The idea that Oliver could be someone so different from the loyal and honest friend that Hugo knew seemed impossible to comprehend. It was as if a part of his own story was being questioned, and accepting it meant facing truths he never imagined existed. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. She took a deep breath, gathering courage to continue. "At first everything was fine, but gradually Oliver started to change. He became controlling, jealous. He began monitoring my movements, my phone. I thought it was just a phase, that he was stressed with work." Hugo listened intently, feeling a mix of shock and sadness. Aurora continued, her voice trembling with each word. "But then, he started yelling at me over small things. Then came the shoving, the threats. I tried to talk, tried to make him seek help, but he always said I was overreacting, that it was my fault for provoking him." Tears now flowed freely down Aurora's face. Hugo felt a wave of anger rising within him but struggled to stay calm for her. "Why didn't you ask for help earlier?" he asked gently. Aurora lowered her eyes, embarrassed. "I was scared. Scared of what he might do. Scared of what people would say. And deep down I still hoped that the Oliver I knew would come back." She paused, her voice becoming more choked. "My family didn't believe me. They said I was exaggerating. And honestly, I started to believe it myself. But yesterday, after a terrible fight, I realized I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed what I could and ran away." Hugo nodded, understanding the difficult situation Aurora was in. "Why did you come to my workshop?" he finally asked, unable to hide his curiosity. It seemed like an unexpected choice, considering the connection between him and Oliver. She hesitated before answering, as if the explanation also pained her. "I knew this would be the last place he would look for me, and he would be ashamed to talk about what happened. I'm sorry for putting you in this situation, but I feel like I can trust you too." Now it was explained, Hugo felt the weight of responsibility fall on his shoulders. He was faced with a moral dilemma. Oliver was his best friend, but everything in Aurora's eyes said she wasn't lying. He knew he couldn't ignore it. "Aurora, you did the right thing by coming here," he finally said. "Let's sort this out together, okay? First, you need to eat something and change those clothes." In the first few days, he discreetly accommodated her in an improvised room at the back of the workshop. He knew he needed to act cautiously and sought help from a lawyer friend to understand how she could request a protective order. The atmosphere was laden with tension. It wouldn't be easy to keep it a secret for long. It was a matter of days before Oliver started looking, and he needed to be prepared. As predicted, a week later, Oliver showed up. He was under a car, changing the oil, when he heard the familiar voice calling his name. The sound made his heart race, but he took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Hugo, my old friend. Long time no see," he exclaimed, breaking into a wide smile and pulling him into a tight hug, as if everything were perfectly normal. Hugo returned the hug mechanically and realized in this demeanor that his friend really might have another side. He noticed the restlessness in his eyes, looking around the shop as if searching for something. "So, what brings you here?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Oliver smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I was passing through town and thought I'd stop by to say hello. How are things?" They talked for a few minutes about trivial matters, but the tension was rising. Finally, the businessman asked, "By any chance you haven't seen Aurora around, have you? She went out to visit some friends and hasn't come back yet." Hugo felt a knot in his stomach. Oliver's lie was so obvious it hurt. He took a deep breath, knowing the moment of truth had arrived. "We need to talk," he said seriously. "I know about her." Oliver's face changed instantly. The mask of cordiality fell, revealing an expression of anger and despair. "What do you know? Where is she?" he demanded, his voice rising in pitch. Stayed calm, facing the furious gaze. "She is safe, and she will stay that way. I know what you've been doing to her, and it needs to stop." Oliver laughed bitterly. "You don't know anything. She is my wife. She is lying about everything. She told me everything. About the abuse, the threats. This isn't right, and you know it," he retorted. For a moment he saw a flicker of shame in Oliver's eyes, quickly replaced by anger. He lunged forward, grabbing Hugo's shirt. "You have no right to interfere in my life. What happens between us is none of your business," he shouted. "Where is she? Tell me now." Gently but firmly, Hugo removed his hands from his shirt. "I won't say where she is, but I will say this. She is safe and protected. She has people supporting her and is taking the necessary legal steps. You need help. This isn't you. This isn't the friend I knew." The words seemed like a direct hit, but his friend quickly lifted his chin, his eyes shining with indignation and disguised manipulation. "You are my friend, my brother for life. We grew up together, and now you're going to take her side. Are you really going to believe everything she said without hearing me out?" Oliver's voice wavered between desperation and an attempt at control, mixing hurt with an accusatory tone. He maintained a firm stance. "It's not about sides. It's about what is right. You know what you did." Oliver clenched his fists, taking a deep breath in a visible attempt to contain his anger. "I love her. Yes, I made mistakes, but who hasn't lost control? You know how things can go off the rails. For everything we've been through together, you owe me this. Tell me where she is." Shaking their head, their gaze steady. "Friendship isn't about owing, it's about character. And if you really want to make things right, the first step is accepting that she needs safety and space. Forcing a reunion will only make things worse." Oliver's expression hardened, a mix of frustration and hurt. "So that's it? You're going to protect her and abandon me? After everything we've done for each other?" "It's not about abandoning anyone," they replied, their voice now filled with firmness. "It's about not going along with what's wrong. You need to look at yourself and understand why it has come to this point." For a moment, he remained silent, breathing heavily. He seemed torn, as if searching for a way to justify his actions, but the words eluded him. Without saying anything more, he took a step back, his eyes filled with frustration and something that looked like regret, before turning and leaving the workshop, slamming the door with force. He sighed, feeling the weight of that conversation. He knew it wouldn't be the last time he would face his friend, but for now, he was sure he had done what needed to be done. Hugo stood in the middle of the workshop, feeling the silence settle in after Oliver's departure. The distant sound of the rain was now the only company in a space that seemed to have lost its warmth. He leaned on the counter, closing his eyes for a moment, and let the tension of that encounter dissolve into a bitter mix of sadness and relief. He felt deeply for Aurora, for everything she had been through, for the pain and fear that had forced her to flee. But he also felt for Oliver, his childhood friend, who had become lost in a cycle of jealousy and violence. It was difficult to accept that the same friend, with whom he had shared dreams and laughter, could cause so much suffering. Aurora's report to the police was the first step in breaking this cycle. Oliver had to face the legal consequences of his actions and undergo a painful but necessary process of change. For months, he went through therapy and complied with legal measures, starting to confront the monsters he himself had nurtured. It was not an easy or quick path, but the transformation came with genuine regret. For Aurora, Hugo's help was more than just shelter. It was the difference between remaining trapped in a cycle of violence and finding the strength to start anew. In the small room at the back of the workshop, she found not only a roof but also respect, support, and the safe space she so desperately needed. When she finally managed to establish herself elsewhere, she left behind more than just the physical scars. She left behind the fear that controlled her, taking with her the hope that she could rebuild her life. As for Hugo, he carried with him a profound lesson about the complexity of relationships and about doing what was right, even when it meant opposing someone you love. He did not renounce Oliver, but he also did not hesitate to protect her. He learned that forgiveness and justice go hand in hand, that it is possible to reach out without ignoring mistakes, but recognizing that true repentance comes with change. Months later, Aurora sent a letter to Hugo, thanking him for his courage and kindness. "You not only helped me leave a dangerous place, Hugo, but you also showed me that there are people who see beyond what is convenient, who do what is right even when it hurts. Because of you, I believe things can get better." Hugo kept that letter carefully, in a drawer, along with other important memories of his life. The workshop returned to its usual rhythm, but he knew he had changed. Despite the pain, disagreement, and weight of choices, he believed that everything would be okay, because each of them, in their own way, was trying to be better. And in the end, that was what mattered. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.